One location, not multiple sites, not scattered evidence. One specific location inside the home of an 84-year-old woman in the Catalina foothills of Tucson, Arizona, where DNA was found that does not belong to Nancy Guthrie or anyone who had legitimate access to her property. That location, the exact place where investigators discovered biological evidence from someone who should never have been inside that residence, is information that the Pima County Sheriff's Department and the FBI have specifically, deliberately, strategically chosen not to disclose to the public. According to the official statement released by the Pima County Sheriff's Department on February 13, 2026, DNA other than Nancy Guthrie's and those in close contact to her has been collected from the property. According to what multiple outlets reported of that statement verbatim, investigators are working to identify who it belongs to. And then the critical sentence, according to the exact language the Sheriff's Department used, "We are not disclosing where that DNA was located." That withholding is not procedural caution. It is not privacy protection. It is not standard investigative discretion, applied uniformly across all evidence categories. It is strategic silence about a piece of information so forensically significant, so investigatively revealing, so potentially case-defining that releasing it to the public would compromise the entire architecture of what this investigation is building toward. This is not a video about who left that DNA at Nancy Guthrie's property. The investigation remains active as of February 16, 2026, and law enforcement has not publicly identified a suspect. 3 individuals were detained on the evening of February 13th near a location approximately 2 miles from Nancy's home, following coordinated FBI and SWAT operations involving multiple agencies, according to reporting by Fox News and local Arizona outlets. A silver Range Rover was photographed being searched in a restaurant parking lot, according to what CNN producers on the ground documented. But no arrests have been announced, and the identities of the detained individuals have not been publicly released, according to official statements from the Pima County Sheriff's Department. This video is about something more fundamental than identity. It is about location. It is about why investigators who have been transparent about nearly every other aspect of the evidence they've collected, who confirmed the existence of DNA evidence publicly, who specified that it doesn't belong to Nancy or those close to her, made the deliberate professional decision to withhold the one detail that tells you what kind of crime this actually was. Because where DNA is found inside a residence tells investigators, tells prosecutors, tells juries, and would tell suspects exactly what happened in that location. The specific room, the specific surface, the specific context of deposit reveals intent, reveals contact, reveals the nature of the encounter between the person who left that DNA and Nancy Guthrie. And that is information that when it becomes public in a courtroom, rather than a press conference, when it is presented as evidence rather than released as an investigative update, it transforms from a detail into a weapon. According to what the Sheriff's Department stated on February 13th, they are working to identify who the DNA belongs to. That process, according to what investigative capability the FBI possesses, involves comparison against the combined DNA index system, potentially forensic genealogy if the profile doesn't match existing law enforcement databases, and methodical elimination of any possible legitimate explanation for that biological material being in that specific location inside Nancy Guthrie's home. Before we examine every implication of this withheld location, before we analyze what different possible locations would reveal about the nature of this crime, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell right now. Here at the Investigation Room, we do not speculate. We examine the documented evidence, the confirmed official statements, and the investigative patterns that experienced law enforcement recognizes, even when the public hasn't yet caught up with what the evidence is actually showing. New investigations and case updates every week. If you think the location of this DNA doesn't matter, if you think it's just standard procedure to withhold evidence details, watch this video first, then decide. Before any analysis, any theory, any evidence examination, we need to understand who this investigation is about. Because the moment she becomes an abstraction, the moment she becomes a case number or a media story rather than a person, we lose the most important thing about this entire investigation. Nancy Long Guthrie was born on January 27, 1942 in Fort Worth, Kentucky, according to public records and family statements. She is 84 years old. She raised 3 children in Arizona over more than 5 decades. Annie, Savannah, and Cameron. She became a grandmother. She remained mentally sharp, cognitively clear, and engaged with the world around her well into her 80s, according to what Sheriff Chris Nanos described to reporters. Her daughter Savannah described her in a video released on February 13th, in terms that reveal a woman whose presence is felt immediately by everyone who knows her. "Our mom is a kind, faithful, loyal, fiercely loving woman of goodness and light," Savannah said, according to CNN's coverage. "She has grandchildren that adore her and crowd around her and cover her with kisses." That woman, that grandmother, was taken from her home sometime in the pre-dawn hours of February 1st, 2026, according to the official timeline established by investigators. And the manner in which she was taken, the evidence left behind, the evidence not left behind, and critically, the DNA evidence found in a location that investigators refuse to identify publicly, forms the investigative foundation of everything we are about to examine. Sheriff Chris Nanos described Nancy to reporters as sharp as a tack, according to what multiple outlets documented from his press conference statements. She had no cognitive impairment, no dementia, no conditions that would cause confusion or disorientation. She was physically limited with mobility concerns that law enforcement acknowledged publicly, and she required daily medication for serious health conditions, including a pacemaker, according to what the sheriff confirmed. But her mind was clear. She knew exactly what was happening the night someone entered her home. That clarity matters to everything that follows, because what happened to Nancy Guthrie was not random. According to what the evidence pattern shows, what happened required detailed knowledge, specific knowledge, the kind of knowledge that comes from proximity, not distance. And the DNA found in that undisclosed location inside her home is biological proof that someone with no legitimate reason to be there was present in a place that tells investigators exactly what the nature of that presence was. The location is in the evidence record. One specific location inside Nancy Guthrie's residence where DNA was collected that does not match Nancy Guthrie or anyone with established legitimate access to the property, according to what the Pima County Sheriff's Department confirmed on February 13, 2026. To understand why that location matters, why experienced investigators chose to protect it from public disclosure, you need to understand what forensic location analysis reveals about criminal behavior, not as theory, as documented investigative reality established through decades of DNA evidence processing by law enforcement agencies around the world. DNA location inside a residence is not neutral information. It is not merely technical detail relevant only to laboratory processing. It is investigative context that transforms biological material from scientific data into narrative evidence that reconstructs what happened in that space. DNA found on a doorknob tells investigators about entry or exit, about touch contact during passage through a threshold, about someone who was moving through the residence rather than remaining stationary in any particular area. DNA found on furniture tells investigators about extended presence, about someone who sat or leaned or made contact with surfaces in ways that suggest time spent in that location rather than brief passage through it. DNA found on personal items, clothing, belongings that Nancy would have handled regularly, tells investigators about direct contact with Nancy's possessions, about someone who touched things that she touched, who moved through her personal space with enough familiarity to interact with objects rather than simply navigate around them. DNA found in a bedroom tells investigators one category of information. DNA found in a bathroom tells them something different. DNA found in a kitchen, a living room, a hallway, an entryway. Each location creates a different investigative framework for understanding the nature of the encounter between the person who left that DNA and Nancy Guthrie. This is not speculation. This is fundamental forensic methodology that former FBI special agents and homicide detectives who have worked DNA-driven investigations describe consistently in their analysis of major cases. According to what forensic experts explain when discussing DNA evidence in criminal investigations, location context is what transforms a biological sample from proof that someone was present somewhere in a residence into proof of what they were doing in that specific place. The Pima County Sheriff's Department and the FBI understand this completely. They understand that releasing the location where DNA was found would tell everyone following this case, including potentially the person who left that DNA, exactly what investigators know about the nature of the crime, based on where that biological evidence was deposited. And they have made the professional decision, reflected in the explicit language of their February 13th statement, that protecting that information serves the investigation more effectively than releasing it serves public transparency. According to the specific wording the Sheriff's Department used, we are not disclosing where that DNA was located. That sentence construction, the active choice to state what they are not doing rather than simply omitting the detail, signals deliberate strategic communication. They are telling everyone that the location exists in their evidence record, that they know where the DNA was found, and that they have specifically decided that knowledge is not for public consumption at this stage of the investigation. Law enforcement agencies do not withhold evidence locations from public disclosure casually. Professional reputation in criminal investigation depends on appropriate information management that balances public interest against investigative necessity. When experienced sheriffs and federal agents make the explicit decision to protect a piece of evidence location data, it reflects professional judgment that releasing it would compromise ongoing investigative work in ways that outweigh the value of public knowledge. What investigative work would be compromised by releasing the DNA location? 3 categories of investigative concern drive this kind of withholding, according to what experienced law enforcement executives explain when discussing evidence disclosure decisions in active investigations. First, suspect identification. If investigators have developed suspects but lack sufficient evidence for arrest, releasing the DNA location could alert those suspects to exactly what evidence exists against them. A person who knows that DNA was found in a specific location can begin constructing explanations for how their DNA might have ended up there through legitimate means. They can claim they touched that surface during a previous visit. They can suggest cross-contamination. They can create reasonable doubt about the significance of the evidence by providing alternative explanations that become harder to disprove once they've been publicly articulated. Second, evidence contamination. If the DNA location suggests additional evidence might exist in related areas that investigators have not yet fully processed, releasing the location prematurely could affect the integrity of evidence still being collected. This is particularly relevant if investigators are conducting phased processing of the scene, where initial DNA collection identifies priority areas for more intensive forensic analysis. Third, prosecution strategy. If the DNA location reveals something about the nature of the crime that would be particularly impactful when presented to a jury for the first time in a courtroom, rather than being previewed through media coverage, prosecutors may request that law enforcement protect that detail. The surprise value of evidence in trial settings. The moment when a jury hears something that they didn't know despite following the case through media coverage, can be strategically significant in building a compelling narrative of guilt. Each of these concerns applies specifically to the Nancy Guthrie investigation, based on what the current state of the case reveals. Investigators detained 3 individuals on February 13th, but have not arrested anyone, suggesting they are building toward arrest rather than immediately executing it. This context makes suspect alerting a significant concern. The FBI's Video Forensic Analysis Unit erected a forensic tent outside Nancy's home on February 12th and conducted extensive scene reconstruction, according to what Fox News Digital reported, suggesting ongoing evidence processing that could be compromised by premature disclosure. And the involvement of federal prosecutors, reflected in the coordinated multi-agency operations, and the FBI's request that local law enforcement not release additional information, according to the Sheriff's Department's statement, indicates prosecution strategy considerations are active factors in disclosure decisions. The DNA location that investigators are protecting tells them something about this crime that they believe will be more powerful, more impactful, more valuable to successful prosecution when it is revealed in a controlled legal setting rather than released through press conferences. That professional judgment, made by experienced investigators who understand how evidence plays in courtrooms, suggests that what the location reveals is significant enough to warrant protection, even at the cost of reduced public transparency in an active missing person investigation. Think about what that means specifically for the Nancy Guthrie case. Law enforcement has been remarkably transparent about most aspects of the evidence they've collected. They released surveillance footage showing a suspect at Nancy's door at 1:47 a.m. on February 1st. They confirmed 41 minutes of documented time-stamped presence inside the residence. They acknowledged that essential medications were left behind. They described security camera failures that suggested prior knowledge. They released forensic analysis establishing the suspect's height as 5 feet 9 to 5 feet 10 inches with extreme accuracy. They confirmed the existence of DNA evidence and specified that it doesn't belong to Nancy or people close to her. But they will not tell you where inside that residence the DNA was found. That selective withholding in the context of otherwise significant transparency tells you that the location is the detail that changes everything. It is the piece of evidence that moves the investigation from presence to action, from opportunity to intent, from someone was in the house to someone did something specific in this specific place. Former FBI special agents who have worked major cases involving DNA evidence have explained in media appearances covering other investigations that location withholding typically indicates one of several specific scenarios. The DNA was found in a location that indicates intimate contact rather than casual presence. The DNA was found in a location that contradicts potential defense explanations about how it got there. The DNA was found in a location that reveals something about the victim's condition or treatment that investigators do not want disclosed before understanding the full context. Or the DNA was found in a location that connects to other evidence in ways that revealing the location would allow suspects to understand the full scope of what investigators know. Each of these scenarios applies potentially to different locations inside Nancy Guthrie's home, and examining what different possible locations would reveal demonstrates why investigators are protecting this information so carefully. If DNA was found in Nancy's bedroom, it would indicate that whoever left it was in the most private, most personal space in her residence. Bedrooms are locations where legitimate visitors rarely go unless they have close personal relationships with the resident. A contractor working on Nancy's roof would have no legitimate reason to be in her bedroom. A service provider making regular visits would not typically enter that space. Even social contacts who visit regularly generally remain in common areas like living rooms and kitchens rather than entering bedrooms. DNA in a bedroom, particularly from someone who has no established legitimate access to the property, immediately focuses investigation on individuals with much closer personal relationships than casual acquaintances or professional service providers. It also raises immediate questions about what happened in that space that would result in DNA transfer. According to what forensic experts explain about DNA deposition, transfer in bedrooms typically involves either extended time spent in that space or physical contact with surfaces and items that are intimate and personal in nature. If DNA was found in a bathroom, particularly Nancy's primary bathroom, it would indicate similar levels of personal space invasion. Bathrooms are even more private than bedrooms in terms of who has legitimate access. They are spaces where people are vulnerable, where personal care occurs, where privacy expectations are highest. Unknown DNA in a bathroom from someone with no legitimate presence creates immediate investigative focus on scenarios involving personal interaction rather than casual contact. If DNA was found in a kitchen, the investigative implications shift. Kitchens are spaces where legitimate visitors often spend time. Someone who came to Nancy's home socially might sit at a kitchen table, might lean against a counter while talking, might touch surfaces while helping with food preparation if they were close enough to Nancy to be involved in those activities. DNA in a kitchen doesn't necessarily indicate the same level of personal space invasion as DNA in a bedroom or bathroom, but it does indicate extended presence rather than brief passage. Because DNA transfer in kitchens typically requires time spent in that space with enough comfort to touch surfaces and items rather than simply moving through. If DNA was found near entry or exit points, doorways, hallways, the investigative interpretation changes again. These are transitional spaces where even brief presence might result in DNA transfer through touch contact with doors, walls, light switches, handles. Someone entering or leaving the residence might leave DNA in these locations without spending extended time in any particular room. But DNA in transitional spaces also raises questions about what the person was doing. Were they entering? Were they leaving? Was the contact made during initial entry in darkness when they might have steadied themselves against a wall? Was it made during exit when they might have been moving quickly or carrying something? Each possible location creates a different investigative framework, and each framework leads to different conclusions about the nature of the crime. The fact that investigators are protecting the location tells you that the actual location is the one that supports the conclusion they are building their case toward. It is the location that is most consistent with what all the other evidence is indicating about what happened to Nancy Guthrie in the pre-dawn hours of February 1st, 2026. And when you place the withheld DNA location alongside everything else investigators found at the scene, the picture that forms is not consistent with random stranger crime, motivated by financial gain. It is consistent with something else entirely. The 41 minutes of documented time-stamped presence inside Nancy's home tells investigators about operational familiarity that strangers cannot possess through brief surveillance. According to what former homicide detective Ted Williams stated in media appearances, 41 minutes inside a residence indicates that the individuals involved possessed detailed knowledge of the property, understood its layout, felt comfortable with the security situation, operated with confidence that should not exist among strangers encountering a residential target for the first time. The essential medications left visibly on the kitchen counter tells investigators about operational objectives that did not include keeping Nancy alive long enough for successful ransom collection. According to what professional kidnapping analysis establishes through decades of documented cases, victims must be kept alive and reasonably healthy until ransom collection is complete. Essential medication is not an afterthought in professional kidnapping operations. It is basic operational necessity. The fact that these medications were not taken, despite 41 minutes of presence in the residence where they were visible and accessible, according to what Sheriff Nanos confirmed, indicates either catastrophic operational incompetence or deliberate abandonment, because long-term survival was never part of the actual plan. The security camera failures that suggested prior knowledge tells investigators about familiarity with the specific installation at Nancy's property. According to what was established during the investigation, interior cameras were not functioning during the 41-minute window, not due to mechanical failure or random malfunction, but in a manner that suggested deliberate intervention or advanced knowledge of which specific systems needed to be addressed. The doorbell camera disconnected at 1:47 a.m., according to the precise timestamp Sheriff Nanos presented in his February 5th press conference, because someone disconnected it. This level of security system awareness, according to what former homicide detective Williams assessed in media statements, indicates prior legitimate presence on the property, contractors who worked on installation or maintenance, service providers with regular interior access, social contacts who had been inside frequently enough to understand the systems. The timing coordination with Nancy Guthrie's Olympic coverage assignment tells investigators about access to information regarding family schedules and vulnerability windows. Nancy Guthrie was taken on the exact weekend that Savannah was scheduled to travel internationally for NBC's coverage of the 2026 Winter Olympics. According to what reporting on Savannah's professional commitments documented, Olympic coverage assignments are determined weeks or months in advance, and that information would have been known to her professional circle, her social contacts, and anyone within the extended network of people who interacted with the Guthrie family. The precision of this timing, landing on the exact weekend of Savannah's scheduled departure, is difficult to attribute to coincidence according to what experienced law enforcement applies to timing analysis. It suggests insider knowledge of the Guthrie family's planning that extends beyond what public media coverage would provide. The ransom communications that violated every behavioral pattern of professional abduction tells investigators that financial extraction may not have been the actual operational objective. Multiple deadlines passed without credible follow-through. No acceptable proof of life was provided. Communication became erratic rather than systematic. According to what FBI behavioral specialists and former FBI special agents like Catherine Schweit have explained, professional kidnapping operations communicate aggressively and consistently because successful financial extraction requires it. The absence of that pattern in the Nancy Guthrie case tells investigators something about whether ransom was ever genuinely the goal, or whether the ransom notes were theater designed to misdirect investigation. And the DNA found in a location that investigators will not disclose tells them something that connects all of these other evidence elements into a coherent narrative about what actually happened inside Nancy Guthrie's home on February 1st, 2026. The location matters because it is the piece of evidence that corroborates or contradicts the working theories that investigators developed based on all the other evidence. 3 working theories have taken shape according to the analytical framework the investigation was building, each supported by different aspects of the evidence, and the DNA location is the detail that could eliminate theories or confirm them. Theory 1, kidnapping that went wrong. Someone identified Nancy as a target for financial gain based on Savannah's prominence and public visibility. They planned the operation with enough attention to detail to disable security cameras and time the approach for pre-dawn hours, but underestimated the complexity of what successful abduction requires. When complications arose, when law enforcement response proved more sophisticated than anticipated, the operation began to deteriorate. This theory explains the initial ransom demands and early communication patterns, but it struggles with evidence that contradicts operational inexperience. The 41 minutes of confident presence contradicts inexperience. The security system knowledge contradicts amateurism. And the medication abandonment contradicts even basic understanding of how to keep an elderly victim alive for ransom negotiation. If the DNA location supports this theory, it would be found in transitional spaces, entry points, areas that suggest someone moving through the residence with uncertainty rather than familiarity. It would be found in locations consistent with brief contact, rather than extended presence in any particular room. The fact that investigators are protecting the DNA location rather than releasing it as evidence of stranger intrusion suggests the location does not support the stranger kidnapping theory. If it did, releasing it would reinforce the narrative of external criminal threat. The decision to withhold it suggests the opposite, that the location is inconsistent with stranger crime, and revealing it would undermine that interpretation. Theory 2. Staged abduction designed to misdirect investigation. What happened to Nancy occurred for personal reasons unrelated to random criminal targeting. Financial disputes within family or social circles, business conflicts involving property or inheritance, personal grievances arising from resentment or psychological factors created motive for targeting Nancy specifically. The ransom element provided cover story designed to point investigation toward stranger crime, rather than toward people closest to Nancy with the most detailed knowledge of her life and vulnerabilities. This theory better explains several troubling evidence patterns. The familiarity demonstrated by 41 minutes of confident presence reflects personal access rather than external surveillance. The security system knowledge reflects intimate understanding gained through legitimate presence. The timing coordination reflects insider knowledge of family planning. And the medication abandonment becomes analytically coherent if long-term survival was never part of the operational objective, regardless of what ransom communications suggested. If the DNA location supports this theory, it would be found in spaces that indicate intimate access and personal familiarity. It would be found in locations where casual visitors don't go, but people with close personal relationships do. It would be found in contexts that suggest extended comfortable presence rather than brief intrusion. The fact that investigators are protecting the DNA location in the context of 3 individuals being detained on February 13th, according to Fox News reporting, suggests the location may support conclusions about personal access and insider knowledge. If the DNA was found in a transitional space suggesting stranger intrusion, there would be less investigative reason to withhold it. If it was found in a personal space suggesting intimate familiarity, withholding protects the prosecution's ability to present that evidence with maximum impact when the time comes to bring charges. Theory 3. Insider involvement enabling the operation. Someone with direct access to Nancy's life, schedules, and personal vulnerabilities either participated directly or provided essential information to individuals who carried out the operation. This involvement doesn't necessarily imply close family participation. The extended social, professional, and service circles that intersect with any person's life include many individuals who possess varying degrees of knowledge about schedules, security systems, property layouts, personal circumstances. Contractors who worked on the home, service providers who made regular visits, social contacts present frequently enough to observe patterns and develop familiarity. Any of these individuals might have provided critical information intentionally or inadvertently to someone who used it to plan and execute what happened on February 1st. If the DNA location supports this theory, it would be found in locations that could be explained through legitimate prior access, but that become suspicious in the context of Nancy's disappearance. A contractor might have legitimate reason to leave DNA in certain areas of the home during work, but if that DNA is found in locations where work would not typically occur, it creates investigative questions about what the person was actually doing in that space. The fact that investigators examined contractors intensively, according to what the investigative record indicates, and that a neighbor's observation about Nancy's unusually well-maintained roof became a specific investigative lead, suggests that contractor access is a significant focus of the investigation. If DNA was found in a location that a contractor could explain through legitimate work, but that seems inconsistent with the nature of work they would have been performing, withholding the location protects investigators' ability to interview suspects about their presence in the home without revealing exactly what evidence exists regarding where they actually went while there. The DNA location that investigators are protecting is the detail that tells them which of these theories, or which combination of these theories, is most consistent with what actually happened. And the fact that they are protecting it so carefully, that they stated explicitly in their February 13th statement that they are not disclosing where it was located, tells you that the location is the piece of evidence that transforms investigative theory into prosecutable fact. When the case eventually reaches courtroom, and the evidence suggests it is being built toward prosecution rather than simply investigation, the DNA location will be presented to a jury as part of a narrative that connects biological evidence to criminal action. The prosecutor will show the jury where inside Nancy Guthrie's home this DNA was found. They will explain what that location means about what the person who left it was doing in that space. They will connect it to all the other evidence, the 41 minutes, the medications, the security cameras, the timing, the ransom communications, and they will show how every piece of evidence points toward the same conclusion about what happened to Nancy. That presentation will be more powerful, more impactful, more difficult to defend against if it is the first time anyone outside the investigation learns where the DNA was found. If suspects have been publicly discussing the case, if defense attorneys have been preparing explanations based on what they think investigators know, if media coverage has been analyzing possible locations and their implications, the moment of revelation loses some of its impact. But if the location has been protected throughout the investigation, if no one except investigators and potentially suspects knows where it was found, the courtroom presentation becomes a moment of disclosure that allows prosecutors to control the narrative about what the evidence means. The Pima County Sheriff's Department and the FBI made the professional judgment that preserving that impact serves justice more effectively than satisfying public curiosity serves transparency. That judgment reflects their assessment that the DNA location is not just another piece of evidence among many. It is the piece of evidence that, when combined with everything else they have collected, proves what happened to Nancy Guthrie in ways that will survive the most rigorous legal challenge. Step back from individual evidence elements. Look at the entire pattern as a whole. 41 minutes of documented presence inside the home. Essential medications left visibly behind. Security systems disabled with insider knowledge. Operation timed precisely to coincide with family travel, creating vulnerability window. Ransom communications violating every behavioral pattern of professional kidnapping. DNA found in a location so significant that federal and local law enforcement made the explicit decision to withhold it from public disclosure. Every one of these elements is inconsistent with the narrative of random stranger crime motivated by financial gain. Every one of them points towards something else, towards someone with knowledge, with access, with familiarity, with information that strangers cannot possess. And the DNA location that investigators are protecting is the piece of evidence that proves it. Sheriff Chris Nanos called in homicide detectives within the first 24 hours of the investigation, a decision he acknowledged publicly was unusual, according to what the documented press conference record shows. Rarely does law enforcement call out homicide investigators in missing person cases, he told reporters. This was different. There is something that is not right here, he stated publicly. Those statements, delivered by a veteran sheriff in an active investigation, reflected evidentiary foundation that warranted exceptional response. The 41 minutes told him something. The medications told him something. The security systems told him something. And when the DNA evidence came back, when investigators learned where inside Nancy's home it was found, it confirmed what Sheriff Nanos had already concluded from the beginning. This was not a random kidnapping. This was something else. And the DNA location is the proof that when it is finally revealed in a courtroom rather than a press conference, will show exactly what that something else was. The investigation continues to move forward with methodical precision. The FBI's 24-hour command post in Tucson remains active according to official statements. Several hundred detectives and agents remain assigned to the case. The reward stands at $100,000 for information leading to Nancy's location, or the arrest and conviction of anyone involved in her disappearance, according to the official FBI announcement. Multiple forensic processes continue. The unknown DNA is being identified through comparison against law enforcement databases, and potentially through forensic genealogy methods. Gloves found approximately 2 miles from the home are in analysis for DNA deposited on interior surfaces during use. Cell tower data from the period around 2 a.m. on February 1st is being processed for phone activity identifying who was in proximity to Nancy's home during that window. Each of these parallel forensic processes represents an independent pathway to identification. When any one of them returns a match, when DNA comparison produces a name, when forensic genealogy identifies biological relatives leading to a specific individual, when glove analysis confirms whose hands wore them, when cell tower data places a specific phone at the scene, the convergence begins. Multiple independent streams of evidence pointing at the same person. And when that convergence occurs, when investigators have biological evidence, physical evidence, digital evidence, all pointing toward the same individual, the DNA location becomes the detail that proves not just presence but action. As of February 16, 2026, Nancy Guthrie has been missing for 15 days. 15 days since someone who knew her home, her schedule, her vulnerabilities took her from that home in the pre-dawn hours of February 1st. 15 days since someone who understood which cameras to disable, who knew the window of opportunity created by family travel, who spent 41 confident minutes inside that residence, left biological evidence in a location that tells investigators exactly what happened in that space. The investigation has produced DNA evidence that does not belong to Nancy or anyone with legitimate access to her property. It has produced the specific location where that DNA was found. A location so significant that experienced law enforcement executives made the explicit professional decision to withhold it from public disclosure. It has produced 3 individuals detained on February 13th, near a location 2 miles from Nancy's home following coordinated multi-agency operations. It has produced a Range Rover searched and towed. It has produced over 18,000 tips processed by investigators working methodically toward resolution. The evidence has always been pointing somewhere specific. The forensic work has always been building toward convergence. And the DNA location that investigators are protecting is the detail that, when it is finally revealed, will show everyone what experienced law enforcement has known from the beginning. This was never what the ransom notes wanted everyone to believe it was. This was something else entirely. And the location where DNA was found inside Nancy Guthrie's home proves it. This investigation has been presented with complete respect for Nancy Guthrie and her family. Every analysis presented here is grounded in official law enforcement statements, court documents, and verified reporting from national news organizations. The theories presented are investigative frameworks that law enforcement uses to analyze evidence patterns, not conclusions about any specific individual's guilt or innocence. If this investigation moved you, if the analysis of why evidence location matters helped you understand what investigators are building toward, subscribe to the Investigation Room. Hit that notification bell. We will continue to track this case as forensic results come in, as the investigation moves toward the resolution it is clearly building toward. Because here, we do not speculate. We examine what the documented evidence actually shows. And the evidence in the Nancy Guthrie case, particularly the DNA location that investigators have strategically chosen to protect, shows that when the full truth is finally revealed, it will prove that what happened to Nancy was never about ransom, never about random crime, never about stranger danger. It was about knowledge, about access, about familiarity. And the DNA found in that undisclosed location inside her home is the biological proof that connects investigative theory to prosecutable fact. Nancy deserves to come home. Her family deserves answers. The evidence deserves to produce justice. The investigation continues.